You can't afford to ignore this. Donald Trump is now openly calling for Republicans to steal power from the states and, in his words, take over the elections. Yesterday, he called into the Dan Bongino show and he said,
look, I took over a border where 25 million people came into our country, many of them murderers. If we don't get them out, Republicans will never win another election. These people were brought to our country to vote, and they vote illegally. And amazing that the Republicans aren't tougher on it. The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting.
Now, one, I know I kind of just hit you in the face with that clip. I want to say welcome back to the Philip DeFranco show. It is Tuesday, February 3rd. Welcome back to another daily dive into the news. But that clip, it's crazy. Or just first of all, the Constitution gives states broad discretion to determine how they run their elections, not the federal government. Second of all, 25 million undocumented immigrants didn't come here under Biden. That's just a lie. We don't have great data past 2023, but Pew estimates that around 3.5 million had come in by that point, putting the total population at around 14 million. And third of all, non-citizens do not vote. Like, putting aside the few extremely rare edge cases that are so negligible that you can basically just say non-citizens don't vote. In fact, Trump's own administration's probe into supposed voter fraud has so far turned up virtually nothing. Reportedly, he had his DHS check nearly 50 million voter registrations, and only about 10,000 or 0.02% were referred for further investigation of non-citizenship. And even assuming that that number is accurate, which it may not be since officials say that, some people were mistakenly flagged, that's only registered voters. It says nothing about how many actually voted. But of course, none of this is new. Election integrity has never been in doubt for anyone but Donald Trump and the people he suckered into his delusional fantasy world. And so it seems like everyone with a shred of sanity left who care about honesty over loyalty, they're looking toward the midterms this year and just chewing their fingernails off. Right? And as far as the 15 places or states where Trump says that he wants to take over voting, he didn't name them, but he mentioned a couple later on, including Minnesota.
It's a mess. There's something in the water up there, and I love the state. I won the state 3 times, but I got no credit for it. I won that state 3 times, but it's a rigged state, really rigged badly with the Somalians. And the theft.
Also, you had him talking about Georgia, where Trump's FBI seized truckloads of 2020 ballots, voter rolls, and scanner images from Fulton County last week.
Now you're going to see something in Georgia where they were able to get, with a court order, the ballots. You're going to see some interesting things come out.
And Trump is right that we have seen some interesting things coming out, though not what he's thinking. Instead, I'm talking about how we saw, of all people, Tulsi Gabbard on site during the FBI raid. Right? And that's really weird and concerning. I mean, we still don't have a very clear answer as to why the director of national intelligence with 0 domestic law enforcement authority would be there. Her job description does not, or rather should not, include on-site involvement in criminal investigative work. Though when lawmakers, they pressed her about it, she replied in a letter yesterday that it does actually fall under her purview because intelligence suggests election systems are vulnerable to foreign interference. But that also still doesn't explain why she attended a different agency's raid in Fulton County in particular. In fact, she admitted that she hadn't even seen the search warrant there. Right, and Gabbard actually added that she was there because Trump personally asked her to be. And as far as why Trump made that request, one source told the Times that he wanted her to assist with the FBI's investigation. But now you actually have The Guardian reporting that Gabbard's running her own investigation into the 2020 election separate from the DOJ investigation, and she's doing it with Trump's approval. And reportedly, she's been at it for months, briefing Trump and senior White House advisors every few weeks on her progress. And with that, you have a source saying that she actually wasn't looking at Fulton County until the FBI raid, and other officials saying that the White House had given her far-ranging authority to hunt for voter fraud in multiple states. And so apparently you've got Tulsi Gabbard cooking up something much bigger than Fulton County, but even there, her involvement was more than just an observer. Because the day after the raid, she met with some of the FBI agents, called Trump on her cell phone, and put him on speaker so that he could talk to them, all of which she admits. And you've got sources telling the Times that Trump asked them questions and praised and thanked them for their work on the probe. One official even adding that the call was fairly short, perhaps just a minute long, and compared the conversation to a pep rally or a coach giving an encouraging halftime speech to his players. Now, that same official also claimed that Trump gave no substantive direction to the agents, which is also something that Gabbard told lawmakers, and she added that he didn't even ask them questions. But regardless of that last part, the fact that this call even took place is kind of nuts on its own, right? I mean, as reports have noted, rather than going to senior department or FBI officials, Mr. Trump spoke directly to the frontline agents doing the granular work of a politically sensitive investigation in which he has a large personal stake. And of course, we can't forget the comment that Trump made at Davos.
People will soon be prosecuted for what they did. It's probably breaking news, but it should be.
And actually speaking of prosecutions, we can expect to see some fireworks in the coming months from Trump's so-called weaponization working group. Right? That's this DOJ task force that Pam Bondi whipped up last year, and she says that it's meant to investigate Biden's weaponization of the DOJ against Trump, but critics say that it's actually meant to weaponize the DOJ against Trump's enemies. Either way, it's been almost a year now, and the group has nothing to show for itself, at least not publicly. And so according to CNN, in recent weeks, Trump's been pressuring Justice Department officials for results in these and other investigations, and recently admonished a group of them for failing to deliver on cases that he wanted brought. And so now this weaponization working group is reportedly expected to start meeting daily with the goal of producing results in the next 2 months. And reportedly, the group's head until now, Ed Martin, he's been pushed aside, with him reportedly keeping his title as the department's pardon attorney, but getting marginalized in his other role as the group's head because senior department officials saw him as ineffective in pursuing cases that Trump wants acted upon immediately. Right? And Martin has also reportedly long rubbed Deputy AG Todd Blanche the wrong way. Right? Reportedly, Blanche took issue with his lack of legal experience and got especially annoyed when Martin would go around him, sometimes to the president himself, sometimes to complain that the department's leadership wasn't moving quickly enough to hold Trump's enemies to account. But really, whatever the case, right, with new leadership at the helm and the Orange Man demanding action, this weaponization group, it's going to be something to keep an eye on this year, especially since Trump's DOJ has charged or investigated just so many people already. Right? You've got John Bolton, Tish James, James Comey, Jerome Powell, Lisa Cook, Don Lemon, all those Democrats who reminded the military not to obey unlawful orders, and on and on and on. But also, Trump isn't just weaponizing the DOJ, they're also doing it with DHS, and we just learned about a new terrifying method that they're using to do so. Right? It's called an administrative subpoena, and the Department of Homeland Security has been using them to target American citizens. And specifically, what you're seeing are protesters, students, and those that vocally oppose them. And we've talked fairly extensively recently about administrative warrants, but an administrative subpoena, it's something different. It's a request for personal information from an establishment like a school, workplace, or even social media platform about specific individuals. And very notably, this type of subpoena does not require a judge or even grand jury's approval. In fact, you've got the Washington Post reporting that officials throughout the Department of Homeland Security, including mid-level roles, have been given authority to approve them. And that's why you've got privacy and civil rights groups accusing Trump's DHS of using this authority to strangle free speech. We've now seen them used to get information about a Columbia student who participated in a pro-Palestine protest, to attempt to identify Instagram users who protested about ICE raids in LA, and even try to get information about the thousands of Minnesota healthcare workers protesting ICE. So also, in some cases, it's smaller scale. You had the Washington Post, for example, interviewing a man named John who had an administrative subpoena served on his Google account. And apparently just for sending an email to a prosecutor threatening to deport an immigrant back to Afghanistan where his life would be in danger. And that email reportedly asked the prosecutor not to play Russian roulette with the immigrant's life, and added, err on the side of caution. There's a reason the US government, along with many other governments, don't recognize the Taliban. Apply principles of common sense and decency. And barely 5 hours later, he got subpoenaed. Now with all this, according to supporters, administrative subpoenas are critical tools that allow investigators to skip the lengthy judicial process when searching for information that could, for example, help track down a pedophile or drug trafficker. But then you have a lot of experts saying that the lack of oversight and general secrecy, it threatens core democratic principles. And so, for example, you had one law professor saying, this vast administrative power has remained opaque even to those who receive these subpoenas and invisible to those it affects most. And with that, you had an attorney for the ACLU adding, there's no oversight ahead of time and there's no ramifications for having abused it after the fact. And saying, as we are increasingly in a world where unmasking critics is important to the administration, this type of legal process is ripe for that kind of abuse. However, legal experts are also noting that even if the courts decide that DHS is abusing its authority with these subpoenas, it's unlikely that they'll actually be forced to stop using them. And so real consequences or real change here, it seems to kind of be off the table. But I will say that may not be the case for the State Department, right? Because the State Department, along with its Secretary Marco Rubio, have now been sued by a coalition of immigration groups, attorneys, and US citizens. And specifically, they're suing over a decision announced last month to suspend immigrant visa approvals for nationals of 75 different countries. At the time that it was announced last month, the reason was apparently to, quote, ensure that new immigrants will not extract wealth from the American people. Because according to the Trump State Department, immigrants from those 75 countries take welfare from the American people at unacceptable rates. In their announcement, adding, we are working to ensure the generosity of the American people will no longer be abused. And the countries in question included Somalia, Haiti, Iran, and Cuba, which is notably where Secretary Marco Rubio's own family is from. However, the lawsuit against the State Department was quick to dismiss the State Department's excuses, calling it a demonstrably false claim, and adding, many applicants for immigrant visas are not eligible for cash welfare and remain ineligible for years. Also, the suit went on to say that the suspension amounts to a ban on nearly half of all immigrant visa applications. And so they're looking to get the decision overturned. But also, that's not the only case against Trump's immigration crusade that we're seeing play out in court. In fact, a judge just blocked the Trump administration's plans to strip the special protection status from Haitian immigrants. More than 350,000 Haitian immigrants live and work in the US under what's called a temporary protected status, or TPS. And TPS, it's given to those whose home countries are unsafe to return for reasons like a natural disaster or political instability. And in Haiti's case, it was activated in 2010 after a catastrophic earthquake, and it's been extended multiple times because of gang violence. That status it was set to end today at the direction of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, but then at the 11th hour, a federal judge blocked the Trump administration from ending the TPS, and she just slammed Kristi Noem specifically. Or just straight up saying that Noem didn't have the authority to make this decision, and adding that Noem's reasoning, quote, focuses on Haitians outside the United States or here illegally, ignoring that Haitian TPS holders already live here and legally so. Also adding that Noem, quote, ignores altogether the billions that Haitian TPS holders contribute to the economy. And so with all that, obviously, Team Trump not happy about this ruling. And you had Tricia McLaughlin, a DHS spokesperson, saying, temporary means temporary, and the final word will not be from an activist judge legislating from the bench. In the meantime, plaintiffs and countless other Haitian immigrants, they're taking this as a win, despite the near guarantee that this case is far from over. And so with that, you had one of the attorneys for the plaintiffs saying, although the government will probably appeal, today's ruling allows Haitian TPS holders to breathe a sigh of relief, even if only a small one. We look forward to defending the court's ruling on appeal. But then also, while we're talking about her, while she's, getting slammed by a judge, Kristi Noem, she's actually making concessions with Democrats about ICE agents, albeit, I'll say, very small ones. Right, specifically, she just announced that all ICE agents in Minneapolis will immediately begin wearing body cameras. And that policy, they say, will spread nationwide as soon as the funding is available. Though also I'll say, Noem herself, she can hardly take credit here. The idea was actually proposed by Republican Senator Ron Johnson as a concession that could keep ICE funded as Democrats block financing, or at least they were blocking financing while I was recording today. The House passed the bill to end the partial government shutdown, sending it to Trump's desk. And that is, this minor change. It definitely doesn't, do much to improve ICE's reputation at home or abroad. Right on that business and political line, we're seeing companies in countries like France and Canada either distancing themselves from or cutting ties with US entities over ICE. Then on more of a social and personal side of things, you have the likes of podcasters like Andrew Schultz getting a ton of attention for saying that he hit his breaking point after watching how the administration responded to the Alex Preddy shooting.
I didn't think what's happening right now with ICE could happen in America. I genuinely did not think that was possible. I thought our institution, I thought the Constitution would hold up. It all of a sudden becomes not liberal catastrophic thinking. It starts to become very reasonable, nuanced criticism of the administration. They have just made the most far left critiques of the Trump administration. Their reaction to this has just justified all of them. In one moment, all of their responses from Trump to Kash Patel, they have justified every single and I know people will probably look at this and be like, they've done a million other things to justify them. Sure, and that's fair. But this specific situation, I think, is a breaking point, and it has justified all those criticisms. I think people's antennas are way up, and people's antennas that were not up initially.
Right, and with all that, you had people kind of seeing this as Andrew kind of conceding that Trump's critics, the people who were sounding the alarms for years, they may have been right all along, or at least they were right on this issue. That ends up being a big deal, not only because his podcast is pretty big, but because Andrew had Trump on his podcast leading up to the 2024 election. And so that's also why you're seeing a lot of mixed reactions to Andrew's comments here. You have some celebrating that anyone who may have supported Trump, they're seeing the light, though others are frustrated that Andrew propped Trump up and now he kind of wants to walk it back. And I will say you actually had his co-host Charlemagne pushing on that front.
Did you not believe Trump would do any of the things that he said he was going to do because you didn't know, or because you believed in the guardrails of America?
I believe in the guardrails of America. There are a lot of things that he ran on, right, that were very seductive, that seemed possible and seemed very doable. And one by one, backtracking on these things.
And all of this, it does feel like it's hitting on a conversation and debate we're seeing play out at all levels. Whether it's personal and private, or Saturday Night Live, they just did a sketch about this kind of thing over the weekend. It's just how 10 toes down the Trump supporters have been, the MAGA movement has been. Some have referred to it as cult-like. The idea that even a small part of it might be open to changing their minds, it feels like a big deal. But also, you've got plenty of people still feeling angry, not trusting these changes of heart, and wanting to just kind of scream, "We told you so." And then there's even more we've got to dive into in just a minute. But first, let me thank a sponsor and say, be honest. Are you still landing in another country and immediately sprinting to find Wi-Fi like it's the final level of a video game? Because if you do, stop. Today's sponsor, Saily, it's your new travel essential. Saily is an eSIM app that lets you get mobile data in 200 plus destinations without dealing with physical SIM cards, roaming fees, or airport kiosk chaos. You download the app once, you pick your plan, install the eSIM, and you're connected the moment you land. You're good to order an Uber, open maps, text people, translate menus instantly, while everyone else is still begging airport Wi-Fi to load. And Saily keeps working across countries, especially if you use their regional or global plans. One eSIM, multiple destinations. And it's not just convenience. Saily Saily has built-in security features like ad blocking and web protection, which help you avoid sketchy pop-ups and fake networks. And if your phone isn't eSIM compatible, they offer a full refund, which is rare and appreciated. So just scan that QR code on the screen or use code Phil at checkout to get 15% off your Saily data plan. Yeah, scan that QR code or just download the Saily app and use code Phil and get connected before your next trip. But then, diving right back into the news, Bill and Hillary Clinton have now caved to Republican demands that they testify before Congress on Jeffrey Epstein, but also Trump's DOJ has continued to insist that the case is closed even as millions of files remain unreleased. Starting with the Clintons, this actually goes back to July when you had House Democrats on the House Oversight Committee forcing a vote to subpoena the DOJ for its files regarding the investigation into Epstein. And the committee also voted for additional subpoenas against the Clintons, 8 former top law enforcement officials, and Ghislaine Maxwell, who's currently serving a 20-year sentence on sex trafficking charges in connection to her role recruiting girls on Epstein's behalf and facilitating his abuse. Now, Maxwell, she's scheduled to be deposed on February 9th, and only one person, former Attorney General William Barr, has already appeared to testify. Also, the Republican chair of the Oversight Committee, James Comer, has withdrawn the subpoenas for 5 former attorneys general who wrote in statements to the panel that they had no knowledge relevant to the investigation. You also had the committee excusing former FBI directors James Comey and Robert Mueller from giving live depositions. But one, Comer refused to excuse the Clintons, although they repeatedly offered to provide the same kind of sworn statement that others had provided, and 2, he also falsely accused them of ignoring the subpoenas, despite their attorney sending multiple letters trying to work something out. Now, that said, Comer has been absolutely right when he claimed that the Clintons have been trying to find a way out of testifying. They were originally scheduled to speak with the committee way back in October of 2025, but then those sessions got delayed until December and then pushed back again to January after the Clintons said that they had to attend a funeral, and then the Clintons told the committee that they wouldn't participate in the rescheduled closed-door depositions at all. And this, even as Comer had threatened to kick off the process to hold them in contempt of Congress, which is punishable by up to a year in prison, as well as a fine of up to $100,000. And in fact, we've seen this play out before. Trump allies Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, for example, they both served 4-month sentences after being found in contempt of Congress in 2021 for defying a subpoena issued by the committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Though I will say, notably, not every witness who defies a congressional subpoena is referred for contempt. Republican Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, for example, he was among the Republican members of Congress who received a subpoena as part of the Jan 6 investigation, but he refused to cooperate. And then, of course, also when Trump was subpoenaed, he sued to try to block it, and the committee eventually withdrew the subpoena. And as far as the Clintons, their lawyers have argued that the subpoenas that they received are legally invalid, saying that this is nothing more than a ploy to attempt to embarrass political rivals as President Trump has directed. But then, after they failed to show up for their most recently scheduled depositions, the Oversight Committee passed resolutions to move forward with holding them in contempt. And notably, you had 9 of the committee's 21 Democrats joining Republicans in support of the charges against Bill, and 3 even supported the measures against Hillary Clinton. And so with all that, you then had the Clintons agreeing to testify. But first, they said that certain conditions would need to be met, including 1, the interview needs to be limited in scope to matters related to the investigations and prosecutions of Epstein, 2, that each session would be no more than 4 hours long, and 3, that Bill Clinton be allowed to bring his own transcriber. Then, what you saw was Comer reject that offer, and last night, the House Rules Committee met to start the process required to bring the contempt vote to the House floor. But then, you had the attorneys for the Clintons emailing Comer and saying that they would agree to his demands, with a spokesperson adding on Twitter, "They negotiated in good faith, you did not. They told you under oath what they know, but you don't care. The former president and former Secretary of State will be there. They look forward to setting a precedent that applies to everyone." So with that, the contempt proceedings have been put on hold, but they also haven't been called off, with Comer saying in a statement, "The Clintons' counsel has said they agreed to terms, but those terms lack clarity yet again, and they have provided no dates for their depositions. We'll clarify the terms they are agreeing to and then discuss next steps with my committee members." And then you also had Speaker Mike Johnson saying today that the Clintons would have until noon to provide details of how they plan to comply with the subpoenas if they didn't want the contempt vote to move forward. So we'll have to see where this goes, but it does seem unlikely that any new information would actually come out of in-person testimony. Neither Clinton has actually been accused of any wrongdoing in connection to Epstein, and both have said that they don't know anything relevant to the committee's investigation. But what we do know is that Clinton was definitely acquainted with Epstein, though he is believed to have cut off contact with him 2 decades ago, and there's no evidence that he's ever visited Epstein's island. That said, he did take 4 international trips on Epstein's private jet in 2002 and 2003, according to flight log, and he's also appeared in Epstein-related photographs released by Congress and the DOJ, including one showing him with Epstein, another showing him in a pool with Ghislaine Maxwell, and 2 others showing him on a private plane and in a hot tub alongside a woman or girl whose face is redacted. And as far as Hillary, there's no known connection to Epstein besides through her husband, right? And their lawyer has said that she had no personal knowledge of Epstein or Maxwell's criminal activities, never flew on his aircraft, never visited his island, and cannot recall ever speaking to Epstein. Now, with all that said, as far as what else we're seeing with this latest Epstein files release. We're seeing continued backlash about what wasn't released and also the way the whole thing's been handled. Right, as we've talked about, you had survivors understandably outraged after the files appeared to expose the names of at least 43 of them, along with there being dozens of unredacted nude images. Right, the DOJ actually leaving all of that unredacted initially, even while taking the time apparently to black out significant chunks of the files for no apparent reason. And that's actually why you had Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie arguing that the redactions appear to not comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which requires that no document be withheld or redacted based on embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity. And all of that as you have Democrats now accusing the DOJ of breaking the law by continuing to withhold as much as 50% of the files, even though we're now well over a month past the December 19th deadline. You know that 50% number? Deputy AG Todd Blanche has explained that by saying that the department had initially found 6 million pages of documents identified as potentially responsive. And he said that they erred on the side of overcollection of materials from various sources to best ensure maximum transparency. And then with that, he said that the number of responsive pages is significantly smaller than the total number of pages initially connected, which is why only around 3.5 million pages were released. You've also, I'll say, had Blanche appearing on Fox News, doubling down on his assertion that the release of these files means that the whole Epstein saga is over.
Any chance that any of these individuals who partied with Epstein and engaged in relations with minors will be prosecuted?
Well,
Any
look,
chance?
I'll never say no. And we will always investigate any evidence of misconduct. But as you know, it is not a crime to party with Mr. Epstein. And so as horrible as it's not a crime to email with Mr. Epstein. And some of these men may have done horrible things. And if we have evidence that allows us to prosecute them, you better believe we will.
And there, I will say he is technically right. It is not technically a crime to have partied with Epstein, and it doesn't seem like anything in the files released so far would be enough to prosecute anyone. But one, especially on the timing of the conversations and relationship, it would show that person's character and judgment, right? And whether they should be in positions of power, people you work with, around children, just as a precautionary thing. And two, you have many saying that having partied with Epstein or, the other things that we've learned from the files, it's a reason to keep on digging. And that's actually a point you had Jon Stewart really hammering home on The Daily Show last night.
They've been on the plane. They've been on the island. They've been to his house. They've given him creepy cards with pubic hair. They've been accused by a multitude of women of a multitude of wrongdoings, and nothing has happened to any of them.
Also, you had Stewart connecting this to the broader political situation, especially the Trump administration's efforts to crack down on immigration as well as sanctuary cities.
It seems pretty clear to me that there is a sanctuary city in this country. But guess what? This kid don't live in it. The real sanctuary city is where money and power protect you from the consequences of sex trafficking or influence peddling or taking $500 million and giving away America's AI infrastructure. Not the small Midwestern city where trying to help a lady get up after she gets maced gets you shot in the back of the fucking head. That's the real sanctuary city. And these are the motherfuckers who live there. Give me the right picture. Yeah.
And included in Stewart's version of the sanctuary city is everyone from Bill Clinton to Bill Gates and Steve Bannon and Elon Musk. And of course, right at the tip or the top is Donald Trump. And with Trump, you had him defending himself in a post on Truth Social writing. Unlike so many people that like to talk trash, I never went to the infested Epstein Island, but almost all of these crooked Democrats and their donors did. But then also, notably at the same time as he was implying that his political opponents might be involved in Epstein's crimes, he also suggested that releasing more documents or investigating further, it would just be a waste of time, guys.
The DOJ, I think, should just say, we have other things to do.
And interestingly, we've also seen similar inconsistencies from Elon Musk, right? Ever since the latest files appear to show that he was just blatantly lying about refusing to go to Epstein's island and that he in fact emailed Epstein multiple times about visiting, even asking when the wildest party would be. Musk, he's been trying to shift attention to Democratic megadonor Reid Hoffman, posting pages from the file showing that the fellow billionaire visited the island. And you have Musk actually claiming that nobody has fought for full release of Epstein files and prosecutions of those who abused children more than he did. And, to be fair, he did call for their release several times in the past, especially after he claimed in a post last year that Trump was in the Epstein files, and that was actually the real reason they hadn't been made public. But that is a post he has since deleted, and he's really tried to ingratiate himself more with the administration again. And now you have him sharing a post claiming that the major takeaways from the new files are that Epstein loved Democrats, liberal elites, but hated Donald Trump. And so that's been one argument that Trump supporters have tried to use to say that the files actually prove Trump's innocence. But one, if you actually go through so many of these files, that is not what these files show. Two, I'll say it's also disheartening that in the United States, it feels like there's really no accountability outside of like a CBS News contributor, but outside of the United States, like there are a number of people having to resign or being kicked out. And three, what it seems like a lot of Trump's defenders don't realize is the people out there that are really pushing for justice, they want anyone, Democrat or Republican, to be prosecuted or held accountable, right, depending on how they were involved or what they were doing. I'll say it, it's very unfortunate. Merrick Garland, I think, was very slow, very kind of worthless. And then in came this Trump administration, and you've had them fighting this the entire time. And so that's why I feel like I have to repeat myself constantly, whether it be this or in a number of other situations. It should be less about left versus right and elites versus everyone else. But then actually the final thing we need to talk about today is that French authorities just raided X's Paris headquarters as part of an investigation into a slew of crimes, including child sexual abuse imagery and Holocaust denial. Right? And they actually also summoned Elon Musk to answer questions in the case. Now, of course, this is obviously coming as X and Grok, they've been facing a ton of international backlash over sexual deepfakes on the platform, but France's investigation actually started over a year ago, where prosecutors were first looking into issues with X's algorithm and how it handles data, but the investigation is now widened to look at a total of 7 different offenses. And so the authorities are alleging that CSA images started increasing last year after X rolled back detection tools, resulting in fewer images being flagged. Authorities also pointed to issues with anti-Semitism, which isn't the most surprising thing. I mean, we all saw Grok go Mecha Hitler last year. Right? And Grok has also been accused of denying the Holocaust by claiming that gas chambers in Auschwitz were designed for disinfection with Zyklon B against typhus, not mass murder. And one of the biggest things here is that France has some of the strictest Holocaust denial laws in the world. And so that's why today, France's cybercrime unit and Europol searched the company's offices. The country's prosecutor's office also deleted its X account shortly after announcing the raid. And with this, you had the lawmaker whose complaint opened up this investigation writing, in Europe, and particularly in France, the rule of law means that no one is above the law and that European regulations, once transposed into French law, are binding on everyone. Now, leading into this, last year, you had X responding to this investigation by calling it politically motivated, denying any wrongdoing, claiming that the probe is undermining X's fundamental right to due process and threatens our users' right to privacy and free speech. And while so far, at least as of recording this, Musk himself hasn't publicly addressed the latest raid, this morning on X, he did respond to a general post about social media crackdowns in Europe by saying, "Tyrants love censorship." All of that is he's facing a voluntary summons for questioning, as is former CEO Linda Yaccarino. Reports also noting that this comes as European governments and American tech companies have been at odds for a while now, as Europe views free speech differently and they have stricter ideas of how social media platforms should be regulated. Right as you had the New York Times explaining, Europeans see their actions as a democratic prerogative necessary to protect citizens from abuse, but then adding that Trump administration sees the fines as an unfair money grab from American companies and considers the regulations to be an attack on free speech. And actually on that note, France isn't the only country to crack down on X lately. Today you also had the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK announcing a formal investigation into X over its personal data processing and Grok's sexualized deepfakes. Also just last week, the European Union issued its inquiry into the deepfake issue. And while so far, there have been no charges filed in France, we'll have to keep an eye on where this investigation goes and if Musk actually directly responds to the summons and answers questions. But that, my friends, you beautiful bastards, brings us to the end of today's Philip DeFranco show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being a part of these daily dives into the news, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow to dive through more of it together.